The sealed envelope had no return address, no official stamp, no indication of its importance. Ambassador Nira Okonkwo found it slipped under her door at the Grand Pavilion like a secret someone wanted forgotten before it was even read. She opened it with steady hands, though something in her gut already knew what it contained. Resolution 7742, passed unanimously by the Galactic Assembly, effective immediately. Humanity's membership was revoked, all trade agreements nullified, all human vessels prohibited from assembly space. 300 years of friendship, cooperation, and shared history, reduced to a single page of cold, bureaucratic language. Nira read it twice, then set it down on her desk and looked out the window at the stars. She had spent 40 years believing in the dream of galactic unity. She had shaken hands with delegates from dozens of species, learned their languages, celebrated their holidays, mourned their dead. And none of them had told her this was coming. She dressed in her formal uniform and walked to the office of First Minister Dral. The Vashan bureaucrat received her with the same thin smile he always wore, his amphibian features betraying nothing. Ambassador Okonkwo, I assume you received our communication. I did, Nira kept her voice level. I was hoping you might explain it. Dral spread his webbed hands. The resolution speaks for itself. The Assembly has determined that humanity's continued membership is not in the best interests of galactic stability. What did we do? Nothing specific. It is simply a matter of, how shall I say, compatibility. Nira studied him for a long moment. She had known Dral for 15 years, had shared meals with him, had helped his daughter find treatment at a human hospital when Vashan medicine failed. Now he looked at her like she was a stranger. We were never even consulted, she said. The matter was decided quickly. There was no time for extended debate. There was time to vote, but not time to ask us why. Dral's smile flickered just for a moment. I am sorry, Ambassador, truly, but the decision is final. Nira nodded slowly. She would not beg. She would not argue. Humans had learned long ago that dignity was the only thing no one could take from you unless you gave it away. Very well, she said, we will leave. Back on Earth, the Emergency Council convened within hours. Admiral Soren Park wanted to demand answers, to threaten consequences, to make the Assembly regret their decision, but Nira's message had been clear. We go quietly, we do not protest. We do not appeal, we leave them with nothing to justify their fear. What fear? Park demanded. We have done nothing to threaten them. That is precisely what frightens them, Nira replied over the quantum link. We will discuss it when I return. For now, trust me. The evacuation took 30 days. Human merchants packed their goods. Human engineers handed over maintenance schedules they had kept for decades. Human doctors said goodbye to patients they had treated for years. On a dozen worlds, members of other species came to see them off. Some brought gifts, some wept. A Belani child gave a human teacher a drawing of them together, surrounded by stars. Will you come back? The child asked. The teacher knelt down and smiled. Maybe someday, but we will always remember you. On the final day, Ambassador Okonkwo stood before the assembly chamber one last time. Most of the seats were empty. Only a handful of delegates had bothered to attend. Perhaps they were curious, perhaps they felt guilty, perhaps they simply wanted to watch humanity fade away. Nira looked at them and felt no anger, only a deep and abiding sadness. 300 years ago, she began. Humanity came to the stars with open hands. We had so little to offer, no great technologies, no vast fleets, no ancient wisdom. We had only ourselves, our curiosity, our compassion, our stubborn refusal to believe that the universe was cold and empty. She paused, letting the words settle. You welcomed us then, you taught us your languages, your histories, your dreams, and we tried to give back what little we could. We built hospitals on worlds that had none. We repaired ships that no one else would touch. We sat with the dying when their own families could not bear to watch. A Kesari delegate shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Today you have asked us to leave. You have not told us why, and we will not ask. We will simply go. Nira took a breath. But I want you to remember something. We came with open hands. We leave with them still open. If you ever need us, truly need us, we will answer. That is not a threat. It is not a bargain. It is simply who we are. She stepped back from the podium. Perhaps one day you will understand why. The chamber remained silent as she walked out. Her footsteps echoed in the vast empty space, and then even that sound faded. The last human ship jumped out of assembly space at midnight. Standard galactic time. There was no fanfare, no ceremony, just a brief flicker of light and then nothing. In the grand pavilion, young Paul, a Voshan archivist, watched the departure from his window. Something about it troubled him. He had processed the resolution himself, and he had noticed something strange. There was no debate record, no testimony, no evidence file. Just a unanimous vote that appeared from nowhere. Paul turned away from the window and walked toward the restricted archives. He needed to understand. The silence humanity left behind was already beginning to echo. 6 months after the humans left, the first ship went silent. It was a Kesari merchant vessel called the Wandering Light, carrying medical supplies to a colony on the outer rim. The crew sent a routine distress call when their engine failed, then waited for rescue. They waited for 8 days. When the patrol ships finally arrived, 12 of the 40 crew members had died. Their life support had failed 3 days before rescue came, and no one had known how to repair it because the system had been designed by human engineers. The survivors were brought to the Grand Pavilion for treatment. One of them, an old trader named Bess, grabbed a journalist by the arm as they wheeled her past. "Where were the humans?" she demanded. "They always came, they always answered. Where were they?" The journalist had no answer. In the archives, Paul continued his secret investigation. He had been searching for weeks, and what he found disturbed him more each day. Resolution 7742 had no procedural trail, no debate transcript, no submitted evidence, no individual voting records. It was as if the resolution had simply appeared, fully formed, with unanimous support from delegates who never discussed it. Paul knew that was impossible. The assembly had strict procedures. Every vote required documentation. Every decision left a paper trail. Unless someone had erased it. He began pulling old records from before the exile, looking for anything that might explain what had happened. What he found instead was a pattern he had never noticed. Humans had been everywhere. They ran the emergency response networks that protected shipping lanes. They staffed the disaster relief teams that responded to floods and earthquakes and plagues. They maintained the power systems. On 100 space stations, they volunteered at hospitals that served species who had no doctors of their own. And they had done it all for free. Paul found a video file from 10 years earlier. It showed a group of human volunteers teaching Voshan children to swim. The children laughed and splashed while their parents watched from the shore. One of the human instructors had given a little Voshan girl a bright orange flotation ring. Paul recognized her. It was his niece. He had never known humans had taught her to swim. He had assumed a Voshan instructor had done it. But no, it had been humans, as it always was, doing the work that no one else wanted to do. Across the galaxy, the cracks were spreading. The Bellani homeworld experienced catastrophic flooding when unusual solar activity melted their polar caps. In previous years, human emergency teams would have arrived within hours, bringing pumps and shelters and doctors. Instead, the assembly debated jurisdiction for 11 days while the death toll climbed. When aid finally arrived, it was too little and too late. 40,000 Bellani had drowned. Paul watched the news coverage from his small apartment, feeling sick. He had found something else in the archives, something that made the flooding tragedy even worse. The Bellani had voted for Resolution 7742. They had voted to exile the very people who had always saved them, and now they were paying the price. That night, Paul broke into the restricted section of the archive. He knew the security codes, knew the patrol schedules, knew exactly where the most sensitive documents were stored. He found what he was looking for in a sealed vault that had not been opened in years. A file labeled The Human Problem Strategic Assessment. Paul copied it to a data chip and fled through the maintenance tunnels, alarms screaming behind him. He made it to the docking bay and hid aboard a supply freighter, clutching the chip in his trembling hands. 3 days later, alone in a safe house on a mining colony, he finally read the document. It was authored by the Inner Council, the secret body that truly controlled the assembly, and it confirmed his worst fears. The humans had not been exiled for anything they did wrong. They had been exiled for doing too much right. The document described humanity as a contaminating influence that threatened galactic identity. It warned that human compassion was creating dangerous dependencies across dozens of species. It noted that human cultural values were spreading through trade and education and intermarriage. The conclusion was stark. Within 5 centuries, the document warned, the galaxy would become human-adjacent. Every species would be shaped by human influence. Human values would dominate. Human connections would bind everyone together. And the Inner Council could not allow that. They feared losing themselves, losing their traditions, losing their power. They feared a galaxy where kindness was the norm and cruelty was the exception. So they had voted in secret to remove humanity before it was too late. Paul set down the document and wept. He had spent his whole life believing the assembly was just. He had trusted the system, trusted his leaders, trusted that the galaxy was governed by wisdom and reason. Now he knew the truth. They had exiled humanity for the crime of caring too much. He picked up his communicator and opened an illegal channel to human space. An old colleague answered, a doctor named Ada Reyes who had once worked at the Grand Pavilion. "Paul," she said, her voice warm but careful, "I was wondering when you would call." "You knew," he said, "you knew why they exiled you." Ada nodded slowly. "We suspected, we saw the fear in their eyes long before the vote, but we hoped we were wrong." "What do I do?" Paul asked. "I have proof, I have everything." Ada was quiet for a moment. "That is not for me to decide, Paul, but I will tell you this. The truth has a way of finding the light. The only question is whether you are brave enough to carry it there." Paul looked at the data chip in his hand. He had a choice to make. The upload took 17 seconds. Paul watched the progress bar fill from a public terminal in a crowded spaceport, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth. Around him, travelers hurried past, oblivious to the small Voshan who was about to tear their galaxy apart. When the bar reached 100%, a simple message appeared on screen. File distributed to 4,271 public networks. Replication in progress. Paul closed his eyes and let out a breath he had been holding for days. It was done. Within hours, the document was everywhere. News networks interrupted their regular programming. Politicians demanded explanations. Citizens gathered in public squares to read the words aloud. The human problem represents an existential threat to galactic identity. Human compassion creates dangerous dependencies that undermine species autonomy. The contamination of traditional values must be halted before irreversible cultural assimilation occurs. The Inner Council tried to claim the document was a forgery, a human fabrication designed to destabilize the assembly, but the encryption signatures were verified by independent analysts. The file had come from the most secure archive in galactic government. There was no hiding from the truth. On the Bellani homeworld, still recovering from the floods, crowds burned effigies of the Inner Council members who had signed the document. They chanted the names of the 40,000 dead, demanding justice for those who had drowned while the assembly debated jurisdiction. The Kesari merchant guilds announced they were suspending all trade with Assembly core worlds until a full investigation was completed. Their ships had depended on human-maintained systems. Their crews had died because no one else knew how to fix what humans had built. Even species that had quietly supported the exile began to turn. They had told themselves it was necessary, that humanity was too influential, too present, too much. Now they saw their own fear reflected back at them in the cold language of the document. And they were ashamed. First Minister Drow appeared on the Assembly broadcast network. His thin face drawn with exhaustion, he read from a prepared statement, denying any knowledge of the document's origins, promising a thorough investigation, assuring the public that the Assembly remained committed to fairness and transparency. No one believed him. 3 council members resigned within the first week. 2 attempted to flee to private estates on distant worlds. They were stopped at checkpoints by their own security forces, who refused to let them pass. Paul was arrested on the 8th day. They found him in a small cafe on a Kesari trading station, drinking tea and watching the chaos unfold on a wall screen. He did not resist when they put the restraints on his wrists. He had known this was coming. His trial was broadcast across the Assembly networks. Billions watched as the young archivist stood before a panel of judges, charged with treason, espionage, and endangering galactic security. The prosecutor presented hours of evidence, security footage of Paul breaking into the archive, transmission logs showing his communication. With human space, technical analysis proving he had uploaded the document. When it was Paul's turn to speak, he simply opened his data pad and began to read. The human problem represents an existential threat to galactic identity. The courtroom fell silent. He read the entire document, every word, every damning sentence. His voice was steady and clear, and when he finished, he looked directly at the judges. "I broke the law," he said. "That is true. But the law I broke was designed to hide a greater crime, the exile of an entire species for the sin of being too kind." One of the judges, an elderly Belani, wiped her eyes. "You have heard the truth," Paul continued. "Now you must decide what to do with it. You can punish me, you can silence me, you can pretend none of this happened, but the galaxy has seen what you did, and they will not forget." The verdict was delayed indefinitely. Meanwhile, a new crisis was unfolding. Core Station 7, the massive orbital habitat at the center of the galaxy, began experiencing critical failures in its gravity systems. The station housed 3 million residents from 12 different species, and its infrastructure had been designed and maintained by human engineers for over a century. Without them, no one knew how to stop the cascade of malfunctions. Emergency teams from 6 species attempted repairs, but the human-designed systems were too complex, too interconnected, too dependent on knowledge that had left with the exiles. Every fix they tried created 3 new problems. The station began venting atmosphere on its lower decks. Ambassador Nira Okonkwo watched the disaster unfold from her garden on Earth. She had retired to a small house near the ocean, trying to find peace after everything that had happened, but peace would not come. Her communicator chimed with an incoming message. It was not from the Assembly, not officially. It was from a junior Kesari diplomat named Bren, someone she had met briefly years ago. The message was simple. "Please, we were wrong, help us." Nero read it 3 times. She thought about the Belani who had drowned while the Assembly debated. She thought about the Kesari crew who had died waiting for rescue that never came. She thought about the document and the fear that had driven good people to do terrible things. Then she called Admiral Park. "Soren," she said, "we need to talk." 3 million people were dying, and only humanity could save them. The question was whether humanity would choose to. The Human Council chamber had not been this full since the day of the exile. Representatives from every colony world had gathered, some in person, some via quantum link. Their faces filled the screens that lined the walls, a mosaic of human diversity united by a single question. Should they help the people who had cast them out? Admiral Soren Park spoke first. His voice was hard with old anger. They exiled us because we cared too much. They called our compassion a disease. They erased us from their history and pretended we never existed. And now they want us to save them. He shook his head. I say let them learn what it means to be alone. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Many had lost friends when the exile began. Many had watched helplessly as the galaxy they loved turned its back on them. The wound was still fresh. Dr. Ada Reyes stood slowly. Her white coat was rumpled from long hours at the hospital, and her eyes were tired, but her voice was clear. 3 million people are on that station, she said. Children who never voted for our exile, families who never read that document, workers who spent their whole lives believing the assembly would protect them. She looked around the room. They are not the ones who hurt us. They are simply the ones who will die if we do nothing. And what happens after we save them? Park demanded. They thank us and exile us again. They write another document about the human problem. We become useful servants until they fear us again. Maybe, Ada admitted. Or maybe something changes. Maybe they see what we really are. The debate continued for hours. Voices rose and fell. Arguments circled back on themselves. The weight of 3 centuries of service pressed against the fresh wound of betrayal. Finally, Ambassador Okonkwo raised her hand. The room fell silent. Even in retirement, Nira commanded respect. I have listened to everyone speak, she said. And I understand the anger. I feel it too. Every day since they handed me that envelope, I have wondered what we did wrong, what more we could have given, what kindness would have been enough. She paused. But I have also thought about who we are, not who they say we are, not the contamination they feared, but the truth of what it means to be human. She stood and walked to the center of the chamber. We are not kind because it benefits us. We are not compassionate because we expect reward. We help because that is who we chose to be. That is the promise we made to ourselves when we first reached the stars. Her eyes swept the room. If we let 3 million people die because their leaders wronged us, what does that make us? If we abandon children to punish politicians, how are we different from the council that exiled us? No one answered. They cast us out for being too human, Nira said softly. Let us show them what that truly means. The vote was not unanimous. 43% opposed sending aid. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too fresh, but 57% voted yes. Humanity would help. Admiral Park accepted the decision with a stiff nod. He was a soldier. He followed orders, even ones he disagreed with. I will lead the fleet myself, he said. If they want to shoot us down, they can look me in the eye while they do it. Within 12 hours, a rescue fleet assembled at the edge of human space. 12 ships, mostly converted cargo haulers and medical frigates. None of them were armed. They carried engineers and doctors and emergency supplies. They carried hope. Commander Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the lead ship, watching her crew prepare for the jump. They were volunteers, every one of them. They knew they might not come back. All ships report ready, her navigator announced. Tanaka nodded. Open a channel, all frequencies. She took a breath. This is Commander Yuki Tanaka of the Human Rescue Fleet. We are responding to the emergency at Core Station 7. We come unarmed. We carry only aid to any assembly vessel that intercepts us. We will not resist if you fire. We ask only that you let us help. She closed the channel. Jump on my mark. The fleet vanished into hyperspace. On Earth, Ambassador Okonkwo watched them go. Her communicator buzzed with a message from the junior diplomat who had first reached out. They are sending warships to intercept you, it read. First Minister Dral has ordered them to destroy your fleet. He says it will prove the document was propaganda. Nira read the message twice. Then she opened a broadcast channel of her own. To all citizens of the Galactic Assembly, this is Ambassador Nira Okonkwo of humanity. Our rescue fleet is currently en route to Core Station 7. They carry no weapons. They seek only to save lives. First Minister Drowl has ordered their destruction. She paused. Watch what happens next, and decide for yourselves what kind of galaxy you want to live in. The message went out to every network, every world, every ship with a receiver. Billions turned their eyes to the stars. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Assembly territory. Waiting for them were 47 warships, weapons armed and ready. Commander Tanaka looked at the tactical display and smiled grimly. Well, she said, let us see who blinks first. The human ships drifted forward at minimum speed, their running lights the only glow against the darkness of space. 47 assembly warships faced them in perfect formation, their weapons charged, their shields raised, their captains awaiting orders. Between them, nothing but silence and the cold light of distant stars. Commander Yuki Tanaka watched the tactical display with calm eyes. She had served 30 years in the human defense forces. She had faced pirates and raiders and things from the void that had no name, but she had never faced anything like this. 12 unarmed ships against a fleet that could destroy them in seconds. Incoming transmission from the Assembly flagship, her communications officer announced. Put it through. The face that appeared on screen belonged to High Marshal Bren, a Vashan with cold gray scales and eyes that had seen too much. He wore his uniform like armor, but something in his expression suggested the weight was crushing him. Human vessels, you are in violation of Resolution 7742. You are ordered to withdraw immediately or be destroyed. Tanaka nodded slowly. High Marshal, I acknowledge your warning, but there are 3 million people dying on Core Station 7, and we are the only ones who can save them. We will not turn back. Bren's jaw tightened. You understand I have orders to fire. I do, Tanaka replied. And you understand we will not resist. Our weapons systems are offline. Our shields are down. You can destroy us whenever you choose. She leaned forward. The only question is whether you will. The channel went silent. In his command center, High Marshal Bren stared at the frozen image of the human commander. She was not begging, not threatening, not trying to negotiate. She was simply stating the truth and waiting to see what he would do with it. His communicator crackled with First Minister Drowl's voice. High Marshal, why have you not fired, destroy? Those ships immediately. Bren did not respond. Instead, he opened a private channel to his captains. Report your status. One by one, they answered. The captain of the destroyer Vigilance spoke first. Her voice was strained. High Marshal, my crew is watching the news feeds. They see the human ships. They know what is happening at Core Station 7. They are asking me why we are pointing weapons at rescue vessels. And what do you tell them? I tell them we have orders, but sir, I am not certain I can give the command to fire. More voices joined in. The captain of the battleship Thunder admitted his gunnery crews had refused to man their stations. The captain of the frigate Swift reported that half his bridge officers had walked off duty. The captain of the cruiser Defiant simply said, My people will not do this, sir. I am sorry. Bren closed his eyes. He thought about the document that was spreading across the galaxy. He thought about the words that described humanity as a contamination, a threat, a problem to be solved. He thought about the Belani who had drowned, the Kesari who had suffocated, the millions who were dying right now on a station that human hands had built. And he thought about the human ships in front of him, unarmed and unafraid, ready to die so they could save strangers who had rejected them. First Minister, he said finally, I will not give the order to fire. Drowl's response was immediate and furious. You will obey or you will be court-martialed. This is treason, High Marshal. Do you understand what you are doing? Yes, Bren replied. I understand exactly what I am doing. I am choosing not to murder people who came to help us." He cut the channel. "All ships stand down and clear a path. Let the humans through." The assembly fleet parted like water around stones, and the human rescue ships sailed through untouched. Across the galaxy, billions watched. Commander Tanaka permitted herself a small smile. Then she turned to her crew. "Full speed to Core Station 7. We have work to do." The station was worse than they had feared. Entire sections had lost atmosphere. Emergency bulkheads had failed. The gravity systems fluctuated wildly, sending debris spinning through corridors. The medical bays were overwhelmed with casualties. Human engineers swarmed through the failing systems, working alongside any local technicians willing to help. They did not ask for credit. They did. Not demand apologies, they simply worked. Dr. Ada Reyes led medical teams into the refugee shelters, treating injuries and illnesses with quiet efficiency. A Bellani mother clutched her hand and wept, thanking her in a language Ada did not speak. Ada simply smiled and moved to the next patient. In a damaged corridor, Commander Tanaka found herself working beside a Vashan engineer named Kel. Together, they rerouted power from a secondary grid to stabilize the gravity generators. "Why did you come?" Kel asked, his hands moving quickly over the controls. Tanaka considered the question. "Because you needed help. That is all the reason we ever needed." Kel was silent for a moment. "We were wrong about your people. I am sorry." "I know," Tanaka replied. "Now help me with this conduit." In his cell on the Grand Pavilion, Paul watched the rescue unfold on a smuggled screen. Tears ran down his face as he saw humans and assembly species working side by side, as he saw children pulled from wreckage and families reunited. A guard approached his cell, the same guard who had slipped him the screen. "The charges against you are being dropped," the guard said quietly. "The council is in chaos. Dral has been removed from office. Everything is changing." Paul nodded slowly, hardly daring to believe it. "What happens now?" The guard glanced at the screen, where human doctors were carrying an injured Kesari child to safety. "I do not know," he admitted, "but I think, for the first time in a long time, it might be something good." 12 hours later, Core Station 7 was stabilized. The death toll was held to 1,200, not the millions that had been predicted. The human fleet prepared to withdraw, their mission complete. But before they could leave, a message arrived from the Grand Pavilion. Ambassador Nira Okonkwo was invited to address the full assembly. Humanity would speak once more.